Hello again. We talked about big cat sightings in the last video, and today we're talking about the idea of a breeding population of big cats in Britain. I've been all around the houses trying to work out how to talk about this. We've had Charles II of Spain, we've had Bobby McCahey, a woman from Des Moines who had septuplets. There's been black-footed ferrets, there's been some of this and some of that, and lots of maths, until I realised that the best place to start a video about a breeding population of big cats in Britain was with wolves. And wolves used to be widespread throughout Europe, but they were hunted to extinction in lots of countries like England and France and Germany. For example, the last wolf in Belgium, so the story goes, was shot and killed by King Leopold II in the 1890s. The last wolf in England was supposed to have been speared to death in Cumbria by a bloke called John Harrington in the 1400s. But that's a bit too good to be true, because the story includes things like long lost sons and hands in marriage to whomsoever shall kill. It's got all the whistles and bells. It's a good story though. In other parts of Europe, the wolf survived into the present day. There were populations in Italy and in Poland, and there were a bigger population in Russia. Poland banned wolf hunting in 1975, and in 1979 the Berne Convention on the Conservation of European Wildlife and Natural Habitat came along. Countries signed up to the convention, and they passed legislation to protect wildlife. And amongst the animals that was there to be protected was the wolf. And this legal protection from the Convention of Berne meant that wolf numbers started to grow. In Italy, the numbers grew until they ran out of space, and they crossed the border into France, into the Mercantour National Park. That happened in 1992. Numbers also grew in Poland, and then in Germany. The wolves spread across Germany until they reached their western borders, and then in 2018, Naya, a radio-collared wolf from eastern Germany, crossed into the Netherlands and then into Belgium. Belgium had wolves for the first time since King Leopold II killed the last wolf in Belgium in the 1890s. Okay, so far so very, very canine. What's this got to do with big cats in Britain? Now the key bit, for our purposes, is that Belgium didn't have wolves for ages, and then it did when Naya arrived. And that's important because a lot of the law surrounding big cats in Britain centres on the Dangerous Wild Animal Act 1976. The idea is that the Act suddenly made it a lot more difficult and expensive to keep dangerous animals. And so some of the owners just released their big cats into the wild, and those cats formed the basis of the breeding population that people still catch glimpses of until today. So if we follow that line of reasoning, in 1976, Britain went from a place that didn't have big cats to being a place that did, in the same way that Belgium suddenly had wolves in 2018. We know that wolves arrived in Belgium in 2018. That's not a question. But what happened next? And did similar things happen in Britain after 1976? So to see what happened next in Belgium, we're going to have to go back a little bit. In the absence of wolves, the Belgian deer population grew, and the government issued licenses to hunters to keep the deer numbers down. The licenses didn't just give permission to hunt, they imposed the obligation of killing a given number of deer, and if you didn't meet your quota, you could be fined, and the fines go from €100 up to €1,000. So when there were no wolves, all was well. There were loads of deer, you could fill your quota, everybody was happy, perhaps not everybody. But as wolf numbers started to go up, the number of deer started to go down because the wolves were eating them. Deer became harder to find, people weren't fulfilling their quotas. So I had a look online for Belgian hunting statistics, and I found this website about biodiversity in Wallonie. and these show the rates of completion of shooting plans for the year 2022-2023. So these are nice and recent. This down the side here, this are the different lots of land for which licenses have been issued. And then left to right shows the percentage of the quota that was met. So if you're over here on the left, that area didn't reach its quota. And if you're over on the right, the area exceeded its quota. And if you bob on this line in the middle, then exactly the predicted number of deer was shot. And as you can see, I mean, there are 34 of these little land units, and only 10 of them managed to meet their quota. On the other 24, the quota was not met. So that goes with this idea that increasing wolf numbers leads to decreasing deer numbers, leads to people having trouble filling their quotas. Okay, so that's something we can look for in Britain. Have we seen deer numbers fall in Britain following the Dangerous Wild Animals Act 1976? No, we haven't. Deer numbers are at an all-time high. On the face of it, that looks like evidence against the idea of a breeding population of big cats in Britain. But we should check some stuff. For example, do big cats eat deer? Yes. Okay, we're using wolves sort of instead of big cats. Is the comparison with wolves valid? They're not the same, obviously. Wolves made a difference to Belgium in 6 years, from 2008 to 2024. If big cats have been breeding in Britain since 1976, that would be 48 years without a decrease in deer population. So again, I think that suggests that there isn't a breeding population of big cats in Britain. Okay, but maybe there is a breeding population of big cats in Britain, but they're not eating deer. Maybe they're eating sheep. I mean, there's loads of sheep in Britain. Depending on the time of year, there's 15 to 30 million of them. And the source for that is Mint, I think. This question of big cats eating sheep has been looked at in other countries. Norway got a lot of media attention because at about the same time as Naya the wolf was crossing the border into Belgium, the Lynx UK Trust and its director Paul O'Donoghue, he's on the left here, wanted to reintroduce big cats to Britain. They planned to release 6 lynx into the Kielder Forest in Northumberland. The idea was that the lynx would eat the deer and keep deer numbers down and stop them damaging so many trees. The then Secretary of State for the Environment, Michael Gove, took advice from Natural England and rejected the scheme because it lacked the necessary depth and rigour. There hadn't been enough consultation with landowners, they didn't seem to have the budget they needed, they didn't have a way of keeping track on what was happening, and they didn't seem to have a way of sort of stopping it if they decided it wasn't working. But people had been thinking about lynx in Britain for a while. In 2008, Dr. Hetherington published research saying that there was enough habitat for 400 lynx in the Scottish Highlands and 50 more in the southern uplands. That's more lynx in Scotland than in Norway. And there was a Freedom of Information Act release, nothing to do with me, I just found it on the internet, about sheep attacks and whether these sheep had been attacked by a big cat. And it includes emails backwards and forwards between officials whose names have been redacted. And at one point, one of them says, "Seeing the massive amount of money the Norwegian government pay in compensation each year for lynx predation and livestock is quite sobering." But he didn't give any numbers. And this same idea came up in a Farmers Weekly article on the 22nd November 2018. Dr. David Hetherington, I'm assuming it's the same bloke, is quoted as saying that the Norwegian government pays out about €3 million, which is about £2.5 million, each year in compensation to farmers who claim to have lost sheep. I had a look online to see if I could find any up-to-date numbers, and on this www.rovbase website, it's where the Norwegians collate their predator data. And one of the things they collate is how much money they're spending on compensation. And you can see this is for all of Norway in the year 2023. Okay, so it starts with these are different areas of Norway, and how many sheep were killed. And then this is the same areas of Norway, but now it's not showing numbers of sheep, it's showing amount of compensation. And that bloke was talking about sobering numbers. Look at the size of that one there, 14 million and odd. If we go down a bit further, we've got the areas again, but now we've got the amount of compensation in that area, and over here the total number of sheep lost. And when we go down to the bottom, they add them all up for us. So now we know the total amount of compensation, and we know the total number of sheep and lambs lost. And then down at the bottom, excuse me, it shows us which predators are taking them. You know, is it lynx? Is it a glutton? Is a wolverine? Or is it bears? Is it wolves? Is it what is it? What is it that's taking them? And we know the total number, and we can just do some sums. So the total amount paid in compensation, 51,862,584 Norwegian krone. And the total number of lambs and sheep taken by all predators combined, 17,434. But the lynx only took 24.1% of that, so that gets us down to 4,201. And the exchange rate between the Norwegian kroner and pound sterling, for every kroner you get about 7p. So, compensation paid for lambs and sheep that were taken by lynx, with the amount expressed in pounds, £937,416.20. And that's just in compensation. That doesn't allow for bureaucratic costs or sending vets out to check or what have you. That's just in compensation. So that's a lot of dead sheep. 4,000 plus dead sheep, and just short of £1 million. Now that said, Norway might not be the best example to choose when it comes to looking at sheep predation. People criticise Norway for not changing the way they look after their sheep. The sheep live indoors for 6 months-ish of the year because it gets quite chilly in Norway. But in the warmer months, the sheep are left to graze unattended in the woods. Now, of course, lynx live in the woods, and they're ambush predators, and they know that sheep are made of meat, and so the lynx eat the sheep. France, on the other hand, has a similar problem, but it has changed the way it farms its sheep. Wolves moved back into France in 1992 in the Mercantour National Park. Okay, that was 1992. Here's a map showing the wolf attacks on livestock for the year 2021-2022. Now, French farmers aren't allowed to shoot the wolves willy-nilly because of the Berne Convention. So they've changed the way they look after their livestock. Okay, they keep shepherds actually in the fields much more than they used to. They use flipping big guard dogs to fight off the wolves. They keep the sheep indoors at night if they can. They have movable electrical fences that they set up each day. And if they do all of that, and if the wolves are still taking their sheep, they are allowed to shoot if the wolves are a permanent presence on their land, and they catch the wolf in the act of attacking the sheep, and the farmer has permission from the government. Now, the government accepts that if they're making farmers do all of that extra stuff and they're still losing animals, they do need to be compensated for that loss. To pay for the dogs and the extra shepherds and the electric fences and all the extra work that entails, not to mention replacing the animals that have been killed and the lambs or the calves that they might have had or the milk they might have produced. It's all very complicated and very, very expensive. It's the sort of expensive that leaves the questions being asked in the House and ministers having to explain themselves. In the French Senate in 2018, the Minister for Agriculture explained, and this is via Google Translate and some exchange rate sums, the Minister for Agriculture explained, for the period 2013-2017, the Wolf Plan had a budget of more than £85 million, including approximately £73.3 million for herd protection measures and approximately £11.8 million for compensation, and then he carries on listing the different things that the budget went to. That's a lot of money. So in summary, wolves arrived in France in 1992, and 26 years later, farming practices have changed, and the budget for coping with wolves is in the tens of millions of pounds a year. We didn't see changes like that in Britain. Deer numbers have gone up. There's been no massive increase in the number of sheep being killed and eaten. There's been no big changes in farming practice to deal with the presence of large predators. And there's been no budget or regulatory response from the government. So that suggests that the Dangerous Wild Animal Act 1976 did not give rise to a breeding population of big cats living in Britain. I know that wolves aren't cats. I'm not suggesting that they are. They're just a big predator that bred and spread out to fill in new territory, use up new resources. The suggestion here is that big cats would spread out. Well, would they? Are there examples of that happening? This was a difficult one because, for the most part, big cats are having a bad time. If you look at the IUCN Red List, they're the people who keep track of whether animals are endangered or not. Lions, tigers, leopards, jaguars and cheetahs are all declining in number, and at best they're vulnerable, and at worst they're threatened. But there is one big cat that's doing better than all of its cousins. The puma, or the cougar, or the panther. They call it different things in different places. The, let's call it cougar, was listed as being an animal of least concern. So cougar, puma, panthers used to be present across North America, but then hunting and other human pressures made them extinct in eastern USA. But then laws on hunting and conservation changed in the 70s, and since then the cougars have been moving east again to fill in all of that empty space. In fact, in 2011, a cougar was knocked down by a car in Connecticut. DNA showed that it belonged to a population from South Dakota, and when they looked back through the records, they realized they could find it along its path from South Dakota to Connecticut. They had it on trail cameras, and they'd found its scat and what have you. So I'm going to take that as a yes. Yes, cats do spread out to exploit available resources with food, space, etc. Hunting laws changed in the 60s and into the 70s, and by 2011 there was a wild cougar being knocked down by a car in Connecticut. Now, as the crow flies, that's about 1,500 miles from its home in South Dakota. Bear in mind that Land's End to Johnny Groats is about 600 miles as the crow flies. Okay, but what if there is a breeding population of big cats in Britain, but it's very small, so it doesn't need a massive number of deer or sheep, and so we don't notice them? Is that possible? There are examples of small breeding populations of cats. It sounds a bit contrary, bearing in mind what I've just said. One of the examples is the cougar, or rather the Florida panther. Do you know they call them different things in different places? If we look at the annual report on the research and management of Florida panthers for 2022-2023, we find that when cougars were hunted to extinction in eastern USA, a small population survived at the southern tip of Florida. They were listed as endangered as early as the 60s. And then inbreeding and human pressure meant that by the 1990s there were only 20 or 30 of them left. Since then, there's been an effort to save the Florida panther. They're showing signs of being inbred, and so to keep them going, authorities have shipped in unrelated cougars from Texas. And that's been, fairly successful. The latest estimate for the numbers of Florida panthers is between 120 and 230. Okay, so that's a nice positive story. But even that small number of cats, when even that was well and truly on the radar. They knew they were there. There was no doubt that they were there. Because as it turns out, cougars are rubbish at crossing the road. Okay, in 2016 alone, just 2016, 34 Florida panthers were killed in car accidents. They just wander into the road. There is another small population. It's lynx this time, and it's in the Vosges Mountains in northeastern France. They've been trying to establish a population there since the 1980s, and it's not going well. They've had similar problems. They keep having to ship in extra lynx from Germany to try and keep the Vosges population going. The most recent estimates are that there are between 10 and 20 lynx in the Vosges Mountains. So that is, there's no question, that is a small population, close to extinction. People still get pictures of them. Final summary. Did the Dangerous Wild Animal Act 1976 give rise to a breeding population of big cats in Britain that has survived to this day? Well, if it was a big population, we'd have seen an impact on prey species like deer and sheep, the way the Belgians and the French did when they suddenly had big predators again, and we haven't seen that. Deer numbers are at an all-time high, farmers aren't up in arms, and there's no huge amount of money being spent on compensation. On the other hand, if it was a small population, like the Florida panther or the Vosges lynx, it would take a serious conservation effort to keep them going, and there's no obvious sign of that happening. And whether it was a big population or a small population, we'd have bodies turning up on the roads. For the Florida panthers, there were 34 killed on the roads in 2016 alone. Now, that was a peak year, but generally in other more normal years, it's 19 or 20. For the lynx in France, not in the Vosges this time, but a bit further to the south, in the Jura, where they have an established population of lynx, in 2016, people were already writing papers about how to stop so many lynx getting knocked down on the roads. So that was 2016, and they don't really seem to have got to the bottom of it. Here's a newspaper article, January 2021, and 5 lynx are being killed in a year. This one's July 2023. Another lynx is being killed, which is bad enough, but that was the 5th large predator death since February. So between February 2023 and July 2023, there's been 5 large predators killed on the roads in the Jura. And if we stay in the same article but scroll down a little bit, we see that 8 lynx were killed the previous year. So that's 8 lynx killed in 2022. But a 5 and an 8 and a 5, that adds up to a lot. These animals are predators with finely honed survival skills, but they don't know their Green Cross code. So if they were there, I think we'd have bodies turning up on the roads. And I think people would see them, because people get videos of them. This first one was taken by Elodie Gallet in May 2024. She lives in the Jura. She was on her way to work one morning, and just as she was approaching the edge of her village, she saw a mother lynx and 2 lynx cubs just wandering down the road. This one was on a much bigger road, the N5, which I think is the equivalent of a big A road. It was September 2021, and a woman was waiting at a stop sign when this happened. So I think this evidence does suggest that the Dangerous Wild Animal Act 1976 didn't give rise to a breeding population of big cats in Britain that has survived to this day. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. I hope you liked this. Look after yourselves, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.